Hello, I'm Sue Andersen, grief guide and yoga teacher, dedicated to helping individuals navigate the challenging journey of loss. Welcome to Growth from Grief, where I aim to offer strategies to transition from the depths of grief to the path of healing. Whatever loss you are grappling with, here you'll discover support to ease both the physical and emotional burdens of grief. Together, let's embark on a journey toward strength, peace, and healing. I'm so glad you are here. Welcome to this episode of Growth from Grief. My name is Sue Andersen. I'm your host. And today we're going to talk about a topic that you may have thought about. You may have asked this question. And it is there a correct way to grieve? Or maybe what should grief look like? So sometimes people get caught up in, am I doing it right? Am I grieving properly? And yet, grief is an intensely personal experience, unique to every individual. So you might imagine that grief means somebody's crying uncontrollably, or they're just retreating from the world. And while these could be part of the grieving process, they just represent a small fraction of what grief could look like. The reality is that grief manifests itself in myriad ways, and so there's just no correct way to grieve. There is not a one-size-fits-all approach. And I think understanding this can help us support others and be kinder to ourselves when we're going through these times of loss. So let's talk a little bit about this myth of the correct way to grieve. We have expectations that are cultural, societal, that often shape our perceptions of how grief should look. Movies, books, maybe your own family, your traditions, well-meaning advice from family, from friends, can create a picture of what grieving, quote unquote, properly means. But sometimes we get stuck in thinking that there are stages or timelines. And instead, grief is really more complex than that. So let's talk about the 5 stages, the Kubler-Ross model. And you might have heard of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. She had groundbreaking research on the 5 stages she named 5 stages of grief, but her work was with people who were dying. And while these can provide a framework, they're never set up to be a rigid roadmap. In other words, you don't start with denial and then go to anger and then go to bargaining and then go to depression and then go to acceptance. It doesn't work that way. People experience emotions and these different feelings in different orders. You might go round and round with anger or blame, for example. Or you might not experience any of these things because it really depends on your loss, right? So it's personal. Think about grieving practices here in the United States. You might have a funeral. There might be a period of mourning. Different cultures, different religions have different practices. Also, cultures in other countries emphasize different things. You might see that a lot of cultures emphasize collective expressions of grief, public expressions of grief. And in other situations, you might see that people want to be private. And again, there are these differences, so there isn't any specific way to grieve. Also, think about your own personal experience, your past experience, you as an individual, your personality, how you cope with things. These all influence how you're going to grieve. Some people feel great after they talk about their feelings, while others prefer solitude. And both of these approaches are valid. So there's nothing wrong with either approach. Let's talk a little bit about the faces of grief, the expressions of grief. And these expressions of grief can really help us appreciate the uniqueness of each person's journey. For example, there's emotional expressions, tears and sadness. So crying can be cathartic. Other people, they do not have this natural response. It doesn't feel good to them. Anger and frustration. Grief can trigger anger. And that anger can be directed towards the situation, towards the person who's grieving, the deceased, other people, family members. Anger is a natural part of grieving. And for some people, add on to that frustration about lack of control or unresolved issues. Other feelings that might come up, guilt or regret, feeling like you should have done something. It's those shoulda, coulda, wouldas, right? You wish you said this, or maybe you wish you didn't say this, or you wish you did this, but you didn't do it. So that's another emotional expression of grief, guilt and regret. Some people may also feel relief. So if you were caring for an individual, you might feel relief that this person is now deceased. And then that can also trigger guilt, right? So you might have those feelings as well. There's also physical symptoms or physical reactions to grief. Fatigue. So it can be physically exhausting, can drain your energy. It's emotionally draining, can drain your energy, right? So fatigue and exhaustion. Changes in appetite. Some people lose weight because they're not hungry. Other people are hungry. So weight changes. Issues or changes with sleep. Insomnia, excessive sleeping, oversleeping. So these are things that happen to people. And I remember being in a grief group where two friends had experienced, each had experienced a loss. And one of those individuals slept all the time, and the other one couldn't sleep. So that was just two reactions, right? So two different reactions. Behavioral or cognitive shifts, difficulty concentrating, trouble focusing, confusion, memory lapses, very common, very common. Can't concentrate. So those are things that certainly would be noticed. Some people have a hard time focusing on tasks. One of the things that was really helpful to me early on in my grief was making a list of things. And I'm talking about a list of things like take a shower, brush your teeth, drink water. because sometimes I just didn't remember to do those things. I wasn't thirsty, or I didn't think I was hungry, so I had to make myself a list. Some people withdraw or retreat from activities, right? They want time alone to process their grief. Others immerse themselves in work or hobbies. They want to be busy. And they could be doing this because they don't want to face the pain at that moment, or they don't want to just sit around. They don't want to be complacent. That feels worse to them. So these are some of the things that people experience. These are again, the faces of grief. And, these are things that happen anytime during this grieving process. Spiritual questions, seeking meaning, right? Grief can prompt deep existential questions. So, wanting to know the why, seeking out answers. Some people turn to religion, some turn away from religion, some struggle with their faith. Some people are angry with their higher power. All of these things, again, are the faces of grief. So, what are the things that each of us can do supporting a person who is grieving, or maybe letting others know what we need in our own grief journey? And I think one of thing that's really important here is to listen without judgment. Listening is such an important skill that we all need to cultivate constantly. At least I need to cultivate it constantly. Allowing people to express their feelings without trying to correct or analyze, getting them to change something or agree with you or interrupting, these are not helpful. They're certainly not helpful at any time, but they're definitely not helpful when a person is grieving. It's just really important to listen, to be there, and to validate their emotions, whatever they are. You don't have to do anything. You can just be present. So just be there, sitting, having a cup of coffee on the couch, letting this person just ramble on, get off their chest whatever it is, whatever that burden is that they want to talk about, and letting them talk about it. Respect their process. So we shouldn't try to get people to move on, expect them to grieve in a particular way or move forward, because guess what? Everyone grieves at their own pace, right? There's no timeline, there's no right way, there's no correct way. And it's important to respect that. Oftentimes, as a person who's experiencing the loss, you might feel that others are trying to get you to move forward, right? Oh, I don't want to see you sad, so I just want you to get over it. Or, gee, we need you back at work. How much longer do you think you're going to be out? These things are not helpful, certainly, to the person who's grieving. If you are grieving, acknowledge your feelings. I think that's really key here. Just acknowledge and allow yourself to feel whatever arises. And don't judge yourself. Just let the emotion come up. Sometimes it'll pass gently, sometimes it'll be difficult, but just let it happen. Seeking support is also, I think, really important. Whether it's group therapy or whether it's individual counseling, talking to a friend, seeking support can really just help you. It can be invaluable, right? It really can. It can help you process what you're going through. Another thing that you can do is take care of your body. So remember to eat, to drink water, to sleep when you can, maybe exercise, journal. Physical activity really helps release emotion. Yoga is another physical activity that you can do that has a lot of benefits, physical, emotional, mental. So, physical activity is something that's really important. Give yourself time. Remember, there's no correct way to grieve. There's no timeline. So you need to allow yourself the time that you need to go through this process. It's okay if the process is slow. It's most likely going to be non-linear. So again, those steps, you might not be moving from one thing to the other. A lot of people talk about moving 3 steps forward and 2 steps back, or 2 steps forward and 5 steps back. So there's a lot of back and forth, especially in the early days of grief. So give yourself time, give yourself grace. I just want to close by again emphasizing that there is no correct way. There is no process that's specific to all. It's multifaceted and deeply personal. For others to expect that we're going to get over it, or that our grief is going to be like their grief process, is unrealistic. And frankly, it's not very kind. So whether you like crying as a way of expression, or maybe you're more physically active as a way of expression, maybe you like to talk about what's happened, or maybe you want to be silent and stay away from friends and family for a while. It's all valid. Each of us has a personal grief journey, and that is valid and deserving of respect. So I hope this was helpful to you if you were questioning if there is a correct way to grieve. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.